Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. When I say evolution, intelligent design, creationism, faith, is there any way these ideas can mesh together? Today's guest articulates what the main arguments are and how he holds them together in an intriguing balance. Hear how he does it today on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Alvin Plantinga, Emeritus Professor in the Notre Dame Philosophy Department, who specializes in the relationship between religion and science. Time magazine called him America's leading Orthodox Protestant philosopher of God. How about that?
Quite a mouthful.
Quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
Evolution means a lot of things to a lot of people. And part of what it means is that the Earth is really, really old. Would you say that most evolutionists believe in the fact that the Earth is this 4 billion years old?
Yeah, certainly. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any evolutionists that didn't believe that, right.
And that the species changes over time.
Right.
But the controversy is how this mechanism happened, how this process of change happened. Is that the sort of crux of the controversy?
Well, it depends on which controversy we're talking about.
Okay.
I don't think among biologists or evolutionists, I don't think there is a lot of controversy there. I think most of them, not all, but most of them agree with Charles Darwin that the main process here is natural selection working on some form of genetic variation.
Okay.
They often talk about random genetic mutations.
What would a random genetic mutation look like? Something that all of us would understand maybe in antibiotics or viruses? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics, and so you keep having to come up with new antibiotics to take account of that. Something happens in the genetic material of one of these, say, or some of these bacteria, which enables them to withstand a particular kind of antibiotic better than the other ones, and it spreads through the whole population. That way their descendants are in the same way able to do that.
So that's sort of like a modern example of evolution that happened billions of years ago, the same kind of process?
That's the suggestion. The thought is that, I mean, you might call that microevolution, sort of relatively small changes. The thought is by virtue of heaping one of these on another and another and another and another, it has gone all the way from something like bacteria, maybe, maybe 3 billion years ago, all the way up to all the forms of life you see now.
Well, you're talking
plants and
humans
animals,
too?
including us human beings.
Yeah.
That's the thought, right.
But I think that's the part that is so hard for people to really get their head around, that you could have something so small as a bacteria. Now, it's even hard to get your head around billions of years.
Right.
That long ago, and that those small sort of cells could actually all of a sudden become plants and animals and humans. So,
well, the all of a sudden part wouldn't be quite accurate. It would be very slow. I mean, 1 billion years is a very, very long time.
Right.
Of course, most already by, say, maybe 500 million years ago, at that time they speak of the Cambrian explosion, at which time most of the main body types already showed up.
Body types of all animals and,
yeah,
okay.
Right, of animals. Don't know about plants, but of animals, right, yeah. So, but I mean, even 500 million years, that's quite a long time too, you know?
Yes,
I mean,
it is.
So this is it's hard to imagine just how long these periods are.
One of the things that people would ask then is, why is it that we don't seem to see changes in humans the same way, or changes in animals the same way, or have we, if we were to look more recently?
I don't think we have, at least I'm not aware that we have, and the answer would be, well, I mean, we've only been observing things for a very short period of time. I mean, how long have we been trying to find new kinds of animals and evidence of natural selection working on random genetic mutation? The last couple of 100 years or so, I mean, you're not going to see anything, according to these people, in that length of time.
What is the discussion between Darwin and individuals who would accept the Darwinian theory of evolution, and perhaps a theist? Is there a way in which those two can come together?
I think they can. I think, though, that one of the main things to see about evolution is the sort of cultural role it plays. And the main part of the cultural role it plays has to do with religion.
Okay.
And there are two central things to see there, I would say. One is that the theory of evolution gave secularists, atheists, agnostics, a way to respond to a question which was otherwise pretty well unanswerable. Namely, well, if God didn't do this, how does it happen that there are all these different kinds of creatures which all display the appearance of design? They all look like they're designed. I mean, you take a look at...
They're fantastic. They all look like they're fantastic.
Yeah, they look like they're the result of enormously clever and enormously detailed design.
Right.
Well, how can that be if you don't think there's any such person as God, or that God isn't the sort of being who would do that? And the theory of evolution gives an answer to that. It's what you might call a not totally off the wall answer.
Okay.
I mean, maybe it's not clear that unguided evolution, unguided in the sense that God wasn't guiding it or directing it or orchestrating it. It's not clear that it could do all of these things, but it's also not clear that it couldn't. So that's one side of it. The other side is that lots and lots of people think there is conflict between belief in God and evolution.
Yes, I would say that some people think evolution's a dirty word.
Right. And one of the reasons they think that is that lots of experts, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and others, say that there is. They say, so for example, Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, which appeared in the 1980s, maybe 1986, the subtitle is How the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design.
Or without God.
Well, it just says without design,
Right.
and if without design, then without God.
Right.
Because if there is such a thing as God, as we Christians think there is, well, God has designed the universe. He's created and designed the universe, created human beings in his image, and so on. So, but if so many of the experts like Dawkins and Dennett say this, it's not surprising that lots of people believe it. And so they think there really is this conflict between the scientific theory of evolution and belief in God.
So there's a group of scientists, evolutionists, Dawkins and Dennett, so on, who say all of this beautiful, fantastic plant-human species could have developed without an intelligent, designed person like God.
Yeah.
But there are some people who say, look, you can't deny all the fossil record and all the other things to show that there must have been this process of evolution, but we still want to believe that there was a guiding kind of God in the back of it. Is that possible?
Sure, I think it's perfectly possible. You could think about guided evolution or unguided evolution. It could be that God used a process like this to create whatever it is he wanted to create. And he could do this in a variety of ways, by causing the right kind of mutations to show up at the right time, by protecting various populations from extinction and so on. So he could have guided the whole process. The scientific theory as such doesn't say that the process is unguided. I mean, science doesn't ordinarily pronounce on questions like, did God guide this or that, or did God use this, or they presumably aren't in the business of saying much about God at all.
Right.
So the scientific theory, it seems to me, doesn't say anything about guidedness or unguidedness one way or the other.
So why are they pronouncing it unguided?
I think they're doing that because they themselves are naturalists. Naturalists would be something like atheism, but a little bit stronger. Okay. So if you're a naturalist, you have to be an atheist, but not vice versa. You could be an atheist without rising to the full heights or maybe descending to the full depths of naturalism. Okay. But you can't be a naturalist without being an atheist. And these folks are naturalists, and they really just attach naturalism to the scientific theory of evolution and then deduce from it that the universe is not designed. And of course, it does follow from the scientific theory together with naturalism that the universe isn't designed, but it follows from naturalism all by itself. So, I mean, if you add naturalism to anything else, the phone book or Greek history or or whatever, of course the combination will imply that the universe is without design.
Right.
But it's not coming from the scientific theory, it's coming from the naturalism part.
Okay, so there is nothing in the scientific record that would disprove a intentional design, a guided design function by a God.
As far as I know, there's absolutely nothing like that.
So is that why people who are Orthodox Christian individuals who believe deeply in God can also reconcile the evolutionary record?
Yeah, and of course lots and lots of Christians do. Lots don't and lots do. Among the ones who do are, for example, Francis Collins, who's a very renowned scientist. He's a serious evangelical Christian and also a serious believer in evolution.
And he charted the DNA code.
Yeah.
And he would make a claim that the DNA code is similar between animals and humans.
Right.
And that's sometimes hard for believing Christians to accept because they have read the creation story. And then that seems like in the creation story, things were made distinctly. How do we sort of reconcile those?
It's perfectly possible both that things are made distinctly and that they have similar DNA.
Oh.
Just as it's perfectly possible both that, say, human beings and other mammals have arms and legs, but are still very different.
Okay.
And even though they say even though the genetic similarities between human beings and, say, chimpanzees are great, they say something like 97% of the genome is shared, something like that, of the genes are shared. But that doesn't mean that, that's not enough to show that chimpanzees and humans are not also very distinct. You find very few evolutionary biologists among chimpanzees, for example. I mean, they can do marvelous things, they can climb trees way better than people can, but there are enormous differences as well. I mean, they don't read or write, they don't write history, they don't write poetry, there are a lot of things they don't do. So, I mean, you have to take an actual look at them, not just at their DNA, but at people and chimpanzees themselves to see whether they're different, and they are very different.
Do evolutionary biologists believe that we actually evolved from the chimpanzee or from that strain? That we're just a more evolved sense of the chimpanzee?
No, the thought is more that chimpanzees and human beings have common ancestors, but not that first there were chimpanzees and then later on human beings.
But we've all seen those charts, right, where it looks as if the person just has evolved more and ultimately is a human as we know it today. Is that a sort of a chart that is interesting but not necessarily true?
Well, I mean, I'm inclined to think that something like that is true, but that doesn't mean that human beings are not very, very different creatures from chimpanzees. It makes perfect sense to suppose that what you say is true, and also that human beings are created in God's image, let's say, as Christians typically think.
Right.
But chimpanzees aren't. That's perfectly possible.
How did the image-bearing piece happen?
I mean, I don't know how science could exactly address that question. I mean, for one thing, it's not exactly clear what the image of God is, but Christians talk about a sort of broad image and a narrow image. And the broad image would be something like the ability to reason and know and so on, hold true beliefs, and also having a moral sense, distinguishing right from wrong and seeing some things are just wrong and other things are right. And also having some capacity for a relationship with God, some kind of personal relationship with God. It's not at all clear how that can be studied scientifically, I mean, is it supposed to be encoded in the DNA or what? It's not at all obvious how that's supposed to go.
So do you think that's a matter of faith? We have general revelation, which would be all of nature and science and the way in which the world operates and works. And then the specific revelation, which many people believe is the Bible, this actual handed down authoritative Word of God. And that's where the image-bearing language and concept comes from. And in some ways, there's an issue of faith that comes into play with believing that specific revelation says we're image bearers.
Yeah, there is an issue of faith there, just as there is with respect to science. I mean, if you're a scientist, you have to take it for granted that the future in some sense resembles the past and that the world is such that we human beings can in fact learn about it. It didn't have to be that way. It could be the world was too complex or just too alien to our intellectual faculties for us to actually be able to learn something from it. There's a whole lot of sort of what you might, I don't know, sort of a background assumption involved in science. And you could speak of that as faith in the same way as then you might think of Christians as having faith with respect to the Bible. If you believe that there is such a person as God, as well, I mean, most of the world's population believes in God or something like God. I mean, Christians and Jews and Muslims, some kinds of Hindus, some kinds of African religion, some kinds of American Indian religion, and so on. If you believe that there is such a person as God, and you also think that evolution has indeed happened, that we got here by virtue of a process of evolution, then it really follows that this process was guided and directed by God, because part of what you think is that God intended that there be creatures of a certain sort and then acted in such a way as to bring it about that there are such creatures.
Some people think that when we believe in this long billion-year process of guided evolution, it somehow diminishes God's creation as described in Genesis.
The fact that so many people think that's more or less a relatively recent development. If you go all the way back to Augustine, for example, he didn't think that the world was created in 6 24-hour days. He thought that these days could be thought of as very long periods of time and so on. And other early Christians, Augustine was in the 5th century, earlier than that even, also didn't feel at all obliged to take the first couple of chapters of Genesis literally. I mean, they thought they had extremely important things to teach us, but they're not necessarily to be taken literally.
So this idea of a poetic beginning in Genesis was perhaps that was a more comfortable concept back in Augustine's time than it seems to be now, that this people are concerned that just labeling something that we don't like or doesn't add up with something, well, that's just poetic or historic. We sort of put a label on something like that, and people worry about that.
People do worry about that, and I think there with some good reason. So you've got these early chapters of Genesis. Well, the question is, suppose you don't want to take them completely literally, then the question is, well, what do you take literally and what don't you?
Right.
I mean, 6 24-hour days, a talking snake, plants on the earth before the sun and moon were created, Adam and Eve, what? One problem here is that with respect to Adam and Eve, St. Paul in the New Testament refers more than once to Adam and Eve and refers to a fall, as by virtue of Adam's fall we sin at all, as the old saying goes. And Paul explicitly says that and explicitly compares Jesus with Adam, the first Adam and the second Adam, as through one man all sinned and death came into the world, so through one shall all be made alive. This is either from Romans or from 2 Corinthians. I'm not sure which.
And sung in the Messiah.
Sung in the Messiah. So it's pretty hard just to sweep that aside and say, well, that's just myth or poetry or something like that. If you do, then you've got to sweep a lot of other things aside.
Right.
Like Paul's, you have to say, well, Paul didn't get this right. You have to say also, you no longer have a doctrine of an original fall and then original sin. You've got to do some pretty substantial changes. So Christians are, it seems to me, very sensibly wary about just declaring all of early Genesis poetry or something like that.
Right.
I mean, even those people who do so, of course, they think it teaches very important truths. It's not just like a silly poem or something. It teaches very important truths, but just to say that none of it is to be taken literally, that's problematic.
Do people who take the Bible seriously and take the quest for understanding this natural revelation seriously, how do we hold it loosely without holding it too loosely so that you don't believe anything? Right? How do we hold those things in tension?
Christians have always believed that God created the world and the like, and Christians have always really believed in Adam and Eve as well, for the most part at any rate. And it's not at all clear that there's anything in the science contradicting that. There are various ways it could be that we all descended from one original pair.
That is possible?
That's perfectly possible. It could go like this. Scientists in this area speak of a bottleneck maybe 150,000 years ago when there were 10,000 members of the line that leads to us human beings.
Only 150,000 years ago?
I think that's right.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem very long when we talk billions. It's like, only 150,000 years ago where there was
Homo
this.
sapiens is vastly younger than, relatively, sometimes they draw these timelines. It'd be only at the very end that you actually find Homo sapiens. So so it could be that there were 10,000 hominids then, let's say, and God treated one pair of them in some special way, conferred some kind of special quality on them by virtue of which they could properly be said to be in God's image. Mm-hmm. And if this was also heritable, it could spread throughout the whole population so that now everybody is really a descendant of Adam and Eve. And it could be that this original pair, after God gave them this special quality, conferred this special quality on them, fell into sin. Could very well happen. So there's no contradiction there. And one thing that's worth noting is that science changes its mind a lot,
Well, I've noticed that. The theories change as the evidence changes.
Right. So it's not clear that Christians ought to always immediately trim their winds to the prevailing scientific breeze. Uh-huh. Next year the breeze might be from the opposite direction. Who knows?
Okay.
So, for example, for a very long time, going all the way back to Aristotle, the basic scientific idea was that the universe is eternal. It's been here forever, right, eternally. But then came the Big Bang theory not so long ago, according to which it began at a certain finite distance in the past, isn't eternal. And then after that, there was a steady state theory proposed by Fred Hoyle and others, according to which it really was eternal and wasn't any beginning to it.
So we kind of just did away with the Big Bang theory?
Well, and then after that, there were real problems developed with the steady state theory involving background radiation and so on, so back to the Big Bang. But now there are straws in the wind suggesting that maybe there's our universe, which had a Big Bang beginning, but then another universe preceding that, and another one preceding that, and so on back indefinitely, so that, again, the universe, the super universe, you might say, mega universe, is substantially eternal. So when you think about science and how it should bear on the rest of what you believe, including religion, you have to be a little careful just because of this fact that science contradicts itself both over time and also at the same time. So at present, for example, there are these two great theories, quantum mechanics and general relativity theory. And although they are, enormously impressive and the like, they can't both be true. So Richard Dawkins said that if you don't believe in evolution, then you are either insane or stupid or ignorant, or he said wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. Daniel Dennett went him one or two better. He said, if you have doubts about evolution, you are culpably ignorant.
Oh.
So if you even wake up in the middle of the night and you say, could it really happen, that all these things got here by way of this process and so on? If you even have a doubt like that, you are both culpable, that would be wicked, I guess.
Yes.
And also ignorant. Well, now, why do people get so excited about that and talk in that fashion? I mean, nobody would say, if you don't believe in quantum mechanics, you're ignorant or stupid or wicked or what.
Right. Well, what would you say, Dr. Plantinga?
Well, I'd say it's because of the religious connection. People like Dennett and Dawkins are very serious naturalists. They are interested in trampling on religion to whatever extent they can. So they seize on evolution as one really good kind of club. They want to say, evolution is incompatible with theistic belief. They're completely wrong on that, but that's what they say. And so they say, if you have any doubts at all about evolution, you're culpably ignorant or you're stupid, insane,
so
or
it sounds
whatever.
a little bullying.
Now, there is a lot of bullying going on nowadays of that sort. These new atheists, in my opinion, are considerably inferior to the old atheists. The old atheists would be people like Bertrand Russell and John Mackey, and, other two, Charlie Broad, etc. They, in my opinion, the new atheists are philosophically very much inferior to the old atheists, but they are very much noisier. Oh. They sort of tend to talk at the top of their voices, and they often sound sort of hysterical.
And that doesn't seem to me to be the sort of curious scientist that you want for the future.
No, it doesn't sound at all like a dispassionate scientist who wants to look at all the evidence and come to a conclusion. It's not like that.
No.
It's much more visceral and much more emotional.
So people in this conversation need to be well-read, wise, and somewhat open-minded as the science changes, but also should feel free to hold on to their faith beliefs and their belief that God is very much present and real in the world then and now.
Well, that's certainly how I would think of it. I mean, and suppose you don't see how to resolve a certain thing at a given moment. Well, you don't have to all the time, you know. People can live without knowing the answer to all these questions, or Christians have always had this problem. There are lots of, why does God permit so much evil in the world? Maybe you don't really know, you know. Maybe you can't think of a really good answer to that question. Okay, well, you can live with that perfectly properly. Everybody has to live with stuff like that.
Exactly. My guest today has been Al Plantinga, emeritus professor in the Notre Dame Philosophy Department, who specializes in the relationship between religion and science. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.